hypothetical.
Right. Oh, okay. I move the table.
Chair recognizes Representative González to close.
Mr. Speaker, members, we all have different experiences. I have a different experience than Mr. Trent Ashby. Trent Ashby has a different experience than Harold Dutton. Harold Dutton has a different experience than Mr. Doc Anderson. And what I'm up here doing is telling you about my experience. And my experience with the women who live on the border and who live in rural communities, so we can attempt to make a bill that does not have unintended consequences on these women.
Mr. King, for what purpose?
The lady yield for a question.
Ms. González, do you yield?
Yes, of course.
Gentlelady yields.
Thank you. And you may have already gone over some of this, but I wasn't able to follow the whole discussion earlier. But basically what you're telling us is that if a rural exemption like this is not that it was placed in the sonogram bill that passed the House and the governor signed a couple of years ago?
Exactly. 2 years ago during the sonogram bill, we made this exemption. What concerns... Can I get some order? Because it's really loud.
Members, please let's give the debate some order so the members debating can hear.
What concerns me about the way this whole day has been going is that instead of trying to create great policy that actually serves the people of Texas, we created an us versus them mentality. And we are not really trying to create policy that is compromising and that's coalitional. All that we've been doing is voting practically party lines. But in the 2011 sonogram bill, we added this exemption, and I'm asking this body to add the same exemption for this piece of legislation.
Thank you. What has to happen then for a woman in your district there in El Paso if there is no rural exemption? I think you did touch on that earlier.
Right. A woman has two options in my district. Go to Mexico and get an abortion, or travel over 1,000 miles to have access to a safe and legal facility.
Well, I'd say that's the very definition of an undue burden. Okay, so rural victims or rape or incest are left with those two choices. They either have to have enough money to travel to one of Texas' major population centers, or they have to carry that fetus.
Right. So because we did not put in the Rape and Incest Amendment, I want members to understand that women who are raped in my district, women who are survivors of incest in my district, will have to travel 1,000 miles just to have access to facilities. Should we already put an additional burden on women who've had this awful experience, or should we at least try to make some exceptions, some possibilities to keep some centers open for the people who are in this area?
Well, there's no question that I appreciate you answering those questions. Your amendment is the least we can do to reduce the undue burden placed on rural Texas women. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative King.
Ms. Flaw, for what purpose?
So the gentlelady yields.
Ms. González, for yields. Gentlelady yields.
Yes, sir.
It was said earlier that these facilities could just upgrade. Are you aware that in 2004 the legislature passed a bill that required abortions after 16 weeks to be performed in ambulatory surgical centers?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And are you aware that after that legislation went into effect, that there were zero locations where women could access this care?
I did not know that.
Are you aware that it took 2.5 years for one of these facilities to be able to find the resources to build one of these facilities, and in fact it's taken 8 years for 5 to obtain the sufficient resources to build an ASC?
And I think that's important information because we should learn from history. I was a history major in undergrad, and that's why we should think of these things that happened in the past and think of how they're going to impact our present day and future. And so it took 8 years to get 5. Imagine how many years it'll take to serve the women in my district and other rural parts of Texas.
Are you also aware, and this comes from an architect that builds ASCs, that a retrofit would cost between $250 to $300 per square foot, which would be estimated $1.4 million to build, or to build from the ground up would be upwards of $3 million. Are you aware of that?
I am aware of that only because that's the reason that the clinic in El Paso will not be able to become an ambulatory center, and they will therefore close.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Farrar.
Speaker.
Mr. Knapp, for what purpose?
Gentlelady yield for a couple questions, brief.
González, will you yield for a couple of questions, please?
Yes, sir.
Gentlelady yield.
You heard Ms. Representative Lautenberg say she wouldn't accept your amendment, correct me if I'm wrong, because there would be a disparate amount or standard of care, meaning there would be a lesser standard of care in the rural communities than there would at these ambulatory surgical centers.
That's what she said, but that's not the reality of the situation.
Did she not also say she wanted all health care to be equal for women?
Yes.
Doesn't that sound a lot like socialism to you? Thank you.
For what purpose?
Will the gentlelady yield?
Yes.
Gentlelady yield.
Mrs. Dawes, I had one more question. Are you aware that in 2004, after that legislation passed, a provider called every single ASC in the state of Texas trying to get privileges for their physicians? They offered to use their facilities after hours and on weekends, this is their language, to bring their own staff and equipment as well, and everyone said no because they were all afraid of the protesters or the spotlight they'd get from anti-abortion folks. Are you aware of that?
I am actually aware of that, and that's why this amendment is so important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Farrar. Members, we've compromised. I've seen us do it 100 times. I understand last special session we didn't want to add amendments because we were concerned with the time. Well, this time we have time. And if we have time, don't we have the duty to do it right for the women in all parts of Texas, not just the women who live in the urban areas, but for the women who live on the border and for the women who live in rural areas? Please consider the fact that we have done this before, and this is a very necessary exemption. Thank you, and I'd move, I urge you to vote no on the motion to table.
Members, Representative González offers up an amendment. Representative Lautenberg moves to table. The question occurs on the motion to table. It's a record vote. Clerk will ring the bell. Show Representative Lautenberg voting aye. If all members voted, show Representative Bonin from Brazoria voting aye. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? There being 91 ayes and 54 nays, the motion to table prevails. Following amendment, clerk will read the amendment.